I'll just start by kind of talking about how kind of my life experience has impacted my journey and trajectory to where I'm going career-wise and why I decided to do the therapy QNRT.
Okay.
So my parents were divorced when I was 5, which of course that's kind of a nice age for a divorce because you don't really remember that much and you're young enough where it's just kind of normal, but at the same time, not
I
ideal.
don't, yeah, I don't think there's a nice age for divorce,
Well, in some ways,
but
I 100% agree with people getting a divorce for the fact
mm,
that it could create a more, like, a more unhealthy environment with the couple being together when they're, like, having a bunch of conflict and not being able to figure things out with kids involved. So I can
yeah,
see why divorce is a good thing and why it should happen. But it's also my experience that if you do have a divorce, you should do it amicably and try
mm,
not to involve the children in certain ways. And that was kind of my experience, was the latter of my parents kind of talked bad about each other to me and my sisters, and it was going back and forth between living at my mom's house for 2 weeks, then my dad's house for a week, and then back to my mom's house. And so I had the experience of a not super stable home, and of course that's just my experience. I'm not trying to compare my experience to anyone else's because everyone has a different experience and there are people who are a lot less fortunate than I. Still, we get impacted by our upbringing and it influences the way we see the world, the way we navigate the world, the way we interpret things. And so, with that, I always knew I wanted to do something mental health wise or something like helping others in some way. I didn't really know what or how. And when I graduated college for my bachelor's, I realized I got my bachelor's in something I absolutely did not want to do. I just did it because people told me to go to school,
uh,
and I didn't work in the field and I just kind of did my own thing. I ended up moving to the cities like on a whim, with moved in with my friend at the time and her father and was like living and paying like super cheap rent, which was nice. But through that experience, I was able to get a job at a holistic health clinic.
mm,
And that was in Woodbury, Sequoia Health. And through that
okay.
experience, completely shifted my entire trajectory of life. There was some really great things and some really big learning experiences that happened there, but the biggest thing was I was exposed to a therapy called quantum neuro reset therapy. And that therapy is specific to evaluating past stressors and how they impact your nervous system, and then repatterning the way that your brain and body responds to those triggers, and then allowing for you to interpret and respond to the world differently because we evaluated the kind of the first wound, and then we
Hmm.
figure out what's picking the scab off the wound, and we're like, okay, so now that we're able to get to the root cause, we can allow that wound to start healing.
Okay.
And I'll leave a pause here for any questions.
Um, so I'm interested in the I guess the entire process of that QNRT therapy. Like,
So it's a little woo woo for some people, and I'll be completely honest about that. Like, that's totally fine. Something you definitely have to experience to really understand, but you can still kind of conceptually get it if like you talk about it as well because it's a hands-on therapy. It was
okay.
developed by a man, John Turner, and I was lucky enough to be trained in neurofeedback therapy by his wife, Teresa Turner. And in couple with QNRT, we did neurofeedback training, and I was a facilitator in that. So I provided neurofeedback training, and I actually got the experience to ask her. I was like, so why, like, how did it all happen? Like, QNRT,
Yeah.
like, how did it happen? And the person who actually developed the therapy, he was in a really tragic accident, and he went through doctors, PT, OT, neurologists. Like, he went the whole entire cycle of trying to heal his body after this accident, and no one was really able to give him the results that he wanted and needed. And he was a chiropractor, so he had already a lot of knowledge in regards to the body and neurology and how everything interacts and communicates. And so he actually went on a hiatus and just did tons of research in regards to the brain and body connection. And through that research, he started to develop QNRT. And so that therapy itself is, I'm just going to kind of present the picture of what a QNRT would look like. You would
Okay.
go into the room with whichever provider you're seeing for QNRT. Minneapolis is actually one of the larger hubs of providers, luckily, and you talk with them a little bit about what it is you're trying to accomplish, if there's anything specific stressing you right now or in general, and that kind of starts getting it to the forefront of your brain and body when you like have that conversation of like, you know what, I'm really trying to work through like my binge eating, or really trying to work through my anxiety in public. And through sharing that, you kind of start getting your brain on point with what it is you're trying to figure out within the session. And then this is where it gets a little woo-woo, is the provider will actually do response testing on your body. And so that is applied kinesiology. And if you search applied kinesiology, you'll get like people talking praise, people talking like this is straight up quack, crap, whatever. And
Yeah.
so I think it's a preference, and it's an experience in itself, but I've had amazing results with it, and I've been able to co-facilitate thousands and thousands of successful QNRT stories through my time at that clinic. And so what the response testing is there's a certain structure to the QNRT. You start off by evaluating what brain lobe the stressor is in, and you do that through stimulating certain points on the body that correlate with your nervous system and like your cranial nerves. Have you ever seen a picture of like your neurology and like how all the nerves go from like your brain all the way down to the rest of your body?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yep.
so you know it's like this intricate system of like branches, and you
Yep.
literally look like there's a tree inside of you
Yep.
because of just how much your body communicates with your brain and vice versa. And so that is kind of connected with like acupuncture. Like, if you know, there's like acupuncture meridians and energy systems that run through our body. And so it's connected in that way of like the cranial nerves, neurology, the meridian systems are all kind of hand in hand with each other. And through stimulating certain points externally on our body and then doing a stress response testing, which is muscle testing, and that could be testing your arm for weakness or even your fingers, like you might hold tight, and then if it's a stress response, your muscles will actually atrophy for a moment, and you won't be able to hold this, and there'll be a little bit of a release. And that is also kind of connected to like the fight or flight nervous system. Like when you're in your sympathetic, when you're in your parasympathetic nervous system mode, you're in that rest, protect, digest mode, you're in your body. But then when you're in that sympathetic nervous system is when your body's in fight or flight, flee. And so the energy actually moves from internally to your extremities, so then that way you can run away if there's a tiger or
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is. But it's similar, where actually like you could hear the word like assault if you were an assault victim, and that would cause a neurological stress response in your system, and you'd actually have a muscle weakness for a moment, and that's determining what your stressors are. And so I know this is kind of hard to explain, and I hope I'm doing an okay job, but in general, it's testing those points, seeing what's a stress response for your body or not, and then, well, so we determine where the stress lies in your brain and body, and then we verbally talk about like, okay, so it looks like these types of emotions were present at some point in your life. We'll actually test like the stage of life that the wound occurred. And so it could be from like 5 to 10 or 5 to whatever. And so, for example, if I was going into the QNRT and it was like about my parents' divorce, I would have a stress response for the age of like 4 or 5, because that's when it happened. And then maybe the emotions that came up that were stressful for my system were like feeling unsafe, feeling unsure, like etc., etc. And so from then we'll figure out, okay, great, so now we have a figure out, like we know when the wound started. And then we fast forward, we test more brain lobes, we test more areas of where there's stress in the body, and then we figure out what's triggering that past experience stress, like what's triggering you now based on your past experience. And through that, it might be like, okay, so my parents were divorced when I was 5, and when I see similar types of communication styles, maybe me within my current relationship, like maybe we don't like communicate well on a certain subject, or we like pick on each other, whatever it is, that could potentially remind me and my brain of seeing things in my parents' relationship around the time that they got divorced, and that makes my current state of being feeling unsafe and like stressed, etc. And so through making those connections, the next step would be repatterning the nervous system. And have you ever heard of EMDR?
It sounds familiar, but
Yeah, that is it's becoming a lot more known, especially in like the mental health community. That is similar in some ways, like the reset portion of QNRT definitely connects with EMDR's principles. And so through the reset portion, when we're trying to repattern the nervous system, we use specific senses and like certain eye movements, maybe certain like colors of light, etc., to stimulate the cranial nerves within our brain. And through stimulating those cranial nerves and then adding in different things of like certain like statements that are like the opposite of all the things that are stressing us, of like, I know that I'm safe in my body. I know that even if there's stress in my relationship, that doesn't mean that it's a bad relationship, etc. And so we're actually stimulating all those different areas of the brain while we're kind of reinforcing the thought processes that we want to have. Because your brain is this beautiful supercomputer, and every experience and thing that you've experienced in your entire life is kind of like captured like a like and it's like a videotape recorder almost, where like if a certain smell can like remind you of like your grandma's cookies, or a certain word can remind you of something that happened to you when you were younger. And so because of that, because of how our brain is, that's kind of the connection when it comes to, okay, now we're actually physically trying to reset what the brain associates when it comes to these stressors. And then at the end of the whole entire reset, we'd start with doing a specific statement to kind of reinforce it. Kind of like an affirmation, kind of not, because it's connected to this really in-depth process. And so it's just kind of setting in stone what we're trying to shift and about our thought process and our reaction process as a human. And so, for example, it might be like, the statement for that scenario would be like, I know that even if there's conflict in my relationships, that doesn't mean, or that doesn't mean that I'm going to have bad relationships, or something in that specific realm. And so I'll leave this other space for questions because that was a lot.
Um,
Yeah.
wow. Yeah. What, so what are some like what are the most common cases where people um I guess could benefit most from this?
Hmm.
Or is there not
I feel
one
like everyone can
particular?
benefit from this therapy, and that's why I'm doing it. Because I was exposed to QNRT and because I experienced it and experienced such a huge shift in regards to myself as a person and my ability to really show up as myself more and more because I felt more safe in my body and like in regards to like how I interact with the world. And the biggest theme that I saw is no matter what age, life cycle, like career path, anything, the biggest place of happiness as well as the biggest place of stressors in our life are our relationships. Like
Hmm.
we find the most joy and the most frustration within those things because we know ourselves within this world based on our relationships. And that's why I decided to go back to specialize in marriage and family therapy because it's relationally based. And through that, through getting my master's in that, I'm able to get like trained and certified within the therapy of QNRT. So by next year, I'll be able to practice it.
Hmm.
And so that's why I believe it can literally help anybody, is because most things are connected to relationships when it comes to like all the thousands, hundreds of thousands of QNRTs that I've observed. It all has to do with family or loved ones or whatever. Like that's what we're relational beings. That's what it all connects
Mhm.
to. And yeah, it's a really beautiful thing because when we're able to show up as ourselves, we're able to really be seen as we really are in our relationships without feeling like I have to show up like this for this person, I have to show up like that for that person. And so it's an overlapping amazing therapy that I think everyone should try. And I'm glad that it's becoming more and more exposed, but I think the hard thing is because there's that woo woo aspect of like muscle testing that a lot of people just like write it off right away of just like, yeah, that's horse crap. But I don't know. I mean, if it works, it works.
Yeah, I don't see it as, anything strange or anything. I mean, it makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
You're if It's almost like it's like bridging a gap between what the medical field has been late, in recent times and I guess in ancient times or the, spiritual kind of uh attack against, certain ailments.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it seems to me. I don't know based
Yeah.
on what I've heard so far.
Yeah, and that's the big thing is like our brain and our body holds like emotional stress. Like we're not just a mental thing. Like we're not just a mental
Mhm.
being, we're a physical body too. And like when we get excited, we feel butterflies in our stomach, or when we get anxious, we feel a tightening in our chest. Like it's figuring out also like how your emotional and mental well-being impacts your physical body because through healing the brain, we heal the body and vice versa. Well, I like the more body up approach because yes, we can try to do like talk therapy for example and really try to like work through and like re like figure out how we can rethink things. But if we're not able to also connect that back to our body, it's not always a long lasting impact or long lasting fix because
Mhm.
we can't always just think our way through situations. Like sometimes, yeah, and it's great. But then other times it's just like, yeah, I'm talking about these things and I wish I could change them, but I don't know how to. because we don't change the way that we feel about them, and we don't change the way that our body responds to like what the stressor is in the first place.
Yeah, if it were easy to just talk about, you know, your issues and have them just go away, then we'd have no problem,
Yeah, that'd be
really. I mean,
lovely. But it's all like it takes work. It's not like a simple thing
mhm.
by any means, but it's just it's bridging, it's giving the opportunity for us to, if there's something that we really want to work through, it gives us that opportunity to really like dive deep into it and kind of shift the way that those past experiences hold us back.
Is there any any small things that people can do in their daily lives that are along the lines of this that, you know, I mean, obviously it'd be best to go in and, you know,
Mhm.
try this out, but
Mhm.
sometimes people can't do that or, you know, are a little
Yeah,
cautious at first. But
that's a really great question. Um, so interesting enough, the mindfulness like shift, or what's the word I'm looking for, like the buzz about mindfulness is a great thing because being mindful in your day to day and really trying to get in touch with your body and calm your thoughts in some ways is training your brain to be in a calm state more often. And so that is a really beautiful thing in itself. Breath work. I'm not a huge meditation person. Breath work is something that I found to be easier for me to do because it's more of a mental and physical type experience. It's not just me sitting there trying to quiet my thoughts. It's me like focusing on my body and consciously controlling my breath so then that way I can focus on something as well as do something that's physiologically like super beneficial for our body. It reduces our heart rate, our blood pressure, our cortisol levels, which is our stress levels. And then practicing gratitude. I think
yeah.
I read something about how it's almost impossible for your brain to be focused on the negative things or the hard things or the things that really suck when you are consciously making a shift to focus on like, okay, but what can I be grateful for in my life within this experience? What am I learning? That is such a powerful thing that I think if we continue to practice can become more second nature. That's the big ticket thing though, is that you have to practice things and make it a regular mindful shift so then that way your brain will more likely go into that pattern. Because if you think of it like a river. If you have a river of negativity and your river of like gratitude is a small little trickle, little by little you might get more water into that gratitude river and it eventually will become a bigger stream hopefully than that negative stream. It's
Hmm.
similar to like the neurological brain pattern is like you can imagine that as the rivers are like your neurological responses.